Kissel.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and I would like to thank Senator McDonald for those kind words. It was a sultry evening way back this summer, July, when an individual's home was broken by what we all have known now to be some of the most horrific events anybody could ever imagine. Dr. Pettit, his wife, Ms. Hawk Pettit, and their two young daughters, Haley and Michaela, ages 17 and 11. It is probably every individual's nightmare that the peace and security that they feel that they have when they get home at the end of the day and they go into their homes and they go to bed, that all of that was rocked to its core, with Dr. Pettit being brutally beaten, his wife murdered, and his two daughters horrifically murdered and burned. It's the kind of shocking story that, for whatever reason, seemed to resonate throughout the entire state of Connecticut. And immediately, come towards that end of July, individuals were saying, what happened? What went wrong? We don't feel safe anymore. Now, since that period of time, many very good and important questions have been asked. For example, in our urban areas, there are crimes that occur almost weekly where individuals are killed. But for whatever reason, good or ill, this particular horrific crime cut across race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status such that nearly everyone that I talked to after this occurred said, "What is going on? You have got to do something." Within a few days of that event, my colleagues and I were saying that a person's home is indeed their castle, and if there was ever a burglary, it should be classified as a violent offense. And it was amazing to note that as individuals were reviewed for possible pardon, that for whatever reason, historically in the state of Connecticut, burglaries were not being considered as violent offenses. And so we called out immediately that that change take place. And within a few days, it didn't matter whether individuals were Democrats or Republicans, but legislators in the House and the Senate were all saying that we need to examine this situation. And great ideas were brought forward. There were many of us, myself included, that said, let's try to take care of some of the things we all are in agreement on as soon as possible. We were clamoring for a special session as soon as the end of summer. Our colleagues, particularly on the other side of the aisle, said, let's take a different approach. But I am happy that ultimately that led us to a special session where here we are today with the proposal that we have before us. And I would say at the outset that probably in excess of 95% of what is in the bill before us is bipartisan, nonpartisan. It's the best of all of our ideas that have been fleshed out and vetted through a variety of processes. Clearly, right at the forefront of this legislation is a new crime called home invasion. Home invasion, where if an individual enters a dwelling unit, the person's home that they feel is their castle, where they should feel a sense of safety and security, and if indeed they have a weapon, and I want to thank the drafters because it is fairly broadly defined as a dangerous instrumentality. So I would believe that if an individual is charged under this, that we wouldn't get bogged down as to exactly how narrowly those definitions are drawn, because indeed if a person's life or health or safety is threatened, that is a dangerous instrumentality. And that if a person is charged herein, that they would receive a mandatory minimum 10-year sentence. Indeed, time and effort was put into examining the status of, well, what about if crime occurs at night? And the hearings that I went to, and Senator McDonald did indicate that when we had the multiple bills before us, that was one of the longest public hearings that I can recall in the 16 years that I've had the honor of serving in this Senate. It went till about 1:30 a.m. and it started about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we've learned that people feel particularly vulnerable at night. That is not to say that there wasn't ample testimony, people that might work a third shift and sleep during the day saying, hey, what about us? What about our sanctity and peace of mind when we're home? And maybe that's another issue that we need to get to when we get into the regular session February 6th. But at least here, a distinction's made that at night individuals feel less secure, and indeed, in many instances, when those individuals are perpetrating burglaries and they're not out to harm individuals but just to steal items, which is a crime, I'm not minimizing it, but they may not have a dangerous instrumentality on them, a gun, a weapon, an explosive device. Most of those folks, criminals though they be, they're not out to harm individuals. But it takes a different kind of individual to go into a person's home at night when most people would suspect someone's in there. And if you walk outside in the neighborhoods at night, you can't tell if anybody's in there, because if it's 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, their lights are out, they're fast asleep. Those individuals, whether they're carrying a gun or not, clearly are elevating the risk to the individuals that feel that their home is their castle. So I think, at least to that extent, this bill has made great headway in addressing the very serious situation that occurred in Cheshire and in so many other places in the state of Connecticut, where people that I work with, people that I encounter, people that are my constituents, have came up to me immediately and said, you as legislators have got to get your arms around this and toughen our laws. And that makes an awful lot of sense. At the same time, this bill also makes great strides in addressing the Connecticut Supreme Court decision in State versus Bell. You all remember that decision. It was a horrible incident that took place downstate where I believe a police officer was killed. And there was a decision that said that part of that sentencing had to go back because it wasn't necessarily the statute, but it was the application of the statute that did not pass constitutional muster. And indeed, to comport with certain United States Supreme Court decisions, the fact finder had to be the same. And we decided to remedy it by taking out certain criteria that seemed to be causing us to run into some trouble. And so it's right now, with the changes in this proposal, it just takes those question marks right out. So that upon a second conviction for some of these crimes that are so delineated, the court has discretion to add additional time. And I know that my friend and colleague, Senator McDonald, calls that a 3 strikes proposal. Later on this afternoon, I anticipate as that amendment is being drafted, there will be another 3 strikes proposal that I believe the public might feel is more akin to the 3 strikes proposal that has been debated over the last several months by folks on both sides of the issue. But certainly, these persistent offender laws have an ability to ratchet up the ultimate sentence that an individual will serve. Now, at the same time we had the public hearing on these variety of bills, we learned an awful lot about the state of the criminal justice system in the state of Connecticut. And there's a part of me that I would never wish that it would take a tragedy to shake us at our core to move forward on an issue. But unfortunately, sometimes that's what it takes. And it's not just the Pettit family, but it's every family and individual that suffers because of crime, that has been harmed or indeed killed, that we are responding to here today. And indeed, I agree with Senator McDonald that this is not the end by any stretch of the imagination, but that we are using this special session as the beginning of a long process where we are dedicated to reforming our criminal justice system so that, and I believe that we can get there, that we can be a leader in our nation when it comes to reforms. And I want to thank, as Senator McDonald did, Governor Rell for her initiative throughout this process, shortly after the tragedy in Cheshire and completely throughout this process, in convening the governor's special task force that vetted a lot of these issues. Now, as I am wont to say, and many of you know, I have several correctional facilities in my district. And right now, probably a very safe guess that I have with North Central Connecticut and the various correctional facilities, probably in excess of 8,000 inmates. That's a lot of folks behind bars. And I've made it very clear that I don't think that bricks and mortar are going to get us out of this situation. I want to get tough, and I believe many of us indeed want to get tough on the perpetrators of violent crimes, but at the same time, we need to be thoughtful as to the allocation of precious tax dollars so that we can break the cycle of recidivism and we can cycle out those individuals in our correctional system and in our criminal justice system that want to be redeemed, that want to follow the right course, that want to turn their lives around. And I believe, as much as there are horrific, diabolical individuals out there that perpetrate these heinous crimes against innocent victims, that the vast majority of criminals, we can turn their lives around. They can turn their lives around themselves. Worked closely over the last several years with Senator Hart, Representative Walker, and other folks trying to break that cycle when it's at the juvenile stage, trying to up the juvenile jurisdiction age, and trying to address that issue so that young people, in particular young men, do not feel that joining a gang or pursuing a life of crime is their only option. And that's going to take continued focus and dedication of resources that we don't even see in this bill. Indeed, most recently at Governor Rell's summit on early childhood education, it was very apparent that when we talk about addressing early childhood education, that we need to get to some of these young people between birth and 3. Vocabularies different in different households. By the time some of these young children get to be in elementary school, they're already fighting to keep up, and they're behind. And ultimately, we see the results in so many instances where options are foreclosed and individuals feel almost predestined to pursue a life of crime. We can get our arms around those issues. We can change how we allocate resources, and we can break the cycle of crime at that stage. At the same time, the public hearings clearly indicated that to the extent the state commits resources to an individual leaving the Department of Corrections, that to the extent we have programs for substance abuse, addiction, just being a good parent, someone to check where you live, jobs programs, and the like, that the percentage of individuals recidivating goes dramatically down. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? If we pursue the old-fashioned path of you've done your time, here's your bus ticket, go home and turn your life around, see ya, that in the vast majority of circumstances, an individual has an awful high mountain to climb to turn their life around successfully. And to the extent we don't use what we've learned, then with that high recidivism rate, it's just an endless cycle. But worse than that, by foreclosing that opportunity to help an individual turn their lives around, how does that individual get back into the system? They commit another crime. And so by not reallocating our resources in a thoughtful manner, we've created new victims. We as a state cannot afford to continue to go down that path for a variety of reasons. First, correctional facilities, bricks and mortar, vastly expensive. Already pushing at the seams in a number of my correctional facilities. I have communicated with the co-chairs and the ranking members of appropriations because I have concerns about staffing levels, even where we have population levels in our facilities right now. That's a tough job. That's not a 40-hour-a-week kind of job. Inmates need to be watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, each and every day of every year. And that's a dangerous job. And we need to make sure that the men and women who serve in our correctional facilities get to go home to their spouses and their children like all of us. And so we got to make sure that those staffing levels are appropriate. At the same time, to alleviate the pressures on the system, we need to pursue a course, as Senator McDonald and others have indicated, where we need reentry beds, housing, programs, appropriate parole officers, probation folks to watch over individuals. For the nonviolent offenders, quite often, they do want to turn their lives around. But if getting out of the system means you can't even find a birth certificate so that you can't even prove who you are, maybe your family doesn't want to get a hold of you, and all of these other things, you immediately are running up against a wall that is difficult to overcome. We need to reallocate those resources. And we heard at the public hearing that it costs an awful lot less, even for complete support services for an inmate that is released back into their community, than it does to keep them incarcerated. It's roughly $50,000 a year per inmate to keep an individual incarcerated. We had individuals testify in front of us saying it's far less and much more productive. This goes a long way, takes first steps in addressing that. Chief State's Attorney Kevin Kane, when we had Commissioner Lance and Chairperson Farr come before us, we had several hearings, and we had an initial sort of review as to sort of what took place to precipitate the Cheshire tragedies and what's going on in our criminal justice system. So before we had the bill proposals, we had a sort of a generic hearing with folks from the administration to come and talk to us. And I really want to commend everybody that did, but Chief State's Attorney Kane, I think, really hit the nail on the head when he said it's communications, communications, communications. Our criminal justice system is not in the 21st century. Even within state's attorneys' offices, they have computer systems that just don't talk to any other computer systems. So much of their files is on paper, and after a certain period of time, it's put in a box, and it's sent off to storage. That's not an excuse for why information has not heretofore been shared within the criminal justice system, but it points out the flaws in the system that we need to address. And before these state agencies take their very valuable resources and say, I need to upgrade this computer system, or I need to upgrade this computer system, we need exactly what Senator McDonald had indicated earlier, and what Governor Rell's task force had indicated, and what leadership on my side of the aisle had indicated, Senator McKinney, Representative Cafaro, and others. We need a cohesive, coherent communications effort where all parts of the system are able to talk to each other, where the state's attorneys can work with police, and that'll be a stretch tying in all our police departments, but at least by the time it gets to the state's attorneys, they can talk to folks in the judicial branch, that the PSIs, the information there, can go. Think of this, because this is the ultimate goal, I believe. In our medical system, we want to have your medical records follow you from when you go in the doctor, when you go to the hospital, when you get released. Those records need to follow you, and then if you go to another physician, those records should follow you. We need to have the same processes in place in our criminal justice system. We need to have an individual's record follow them. Now, when it comes to reforms regarding juvenile law, I clearly agree that that information should not be made open to the public to harm a youngster. We made a policy decision long ago that to the extent someone has an indiscretion when they're young, it shouldn't brand them for life from being able to turn their lives around. It shouldn't dog them. It shouldn't haunt them. But to the extent that individual commits another crime and is found guilty by a judge or a jury, then at other points along the system, that information can be incredibly valuable. And indeed, incredibly valuable if an individual is coming up for a possibility of parole. Because in the seminars that I've gone to, the testimony that was offered at our public hearings, and the other information that was given to us by experts in the field, clearly what has happened early on in an individual's criminal career is a great predictor, probably the #1 predictor, as to future actions. So, should not that information be made valuable to other folks in that chain of the process, to the Department of Corrections, so that they can make meaningful decisions regarding housing? Would not that be critical information? And I use this as an example. Let's say you have somebody that assaulted someone. Well, if in their juvenile past, wouldn't it be helpful to know if they had a juvenile record where they were found as a juvenile to have stolen a pair of sneakers or to have tortured small animals? Wouldn't you look at that individual differently? And experts in the field say yes. You need to look at a totality of an individual's behavior, because when you look at all those factors, they are the greatest predictors. Another item in this bill is changing the Board of Pardons and Paroles, allocating resources to the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and also, and I think extremely importantly, the chairman of the Board of Pardons and Paroles has got to make a determination that all the information that's available has been gathered up before those folks on the Board of Pardons and Paroles make a determination as to whether to grant parole. So we're narrowing the scope of possible administrative parole. We're expanding the scope of those parole decisions where criminal defendants are looked right in the eye and have to come before the board to explain themselves, to answer any questions. We're expanding the pool of information that is going to be required before those determinations can be made. We're working along a path of increasing the pool of information and the communication of that information. And so indeed, as I believe we have seen this afternoon, how could we not think of this daunting task that we are about to embark on? How could we not look at this legislation as not a first step? I want to conclude my remarks by stating to Dr. Pettit that no one can bring your loved ones back, and that to all the family and friends of victims throughout the state of Connecticut, no one can bring your loved ones back. And quite honestly, it's unfortunate that sometimes it takes a shocking tragedy or something quite out of the ordinary to shake this legislature into looking into something and buckling down and trying to solve it as best we can. To that extent, maybe some good can come out of some very bad incidents. But our commitment here this afternoon has got to be not to try to pass this piece of legislation in special session, which we have spent, many of us, on both sides of the aisle, so much time and effort, but to make a commitment to the family and friends and to the memories of those who may have lost their lives due to crimes, or who may be out there suffering through the memories of being maimed or raped or whatever, that our commitment is long-lasting, and that we know we have a daunting task before us, and that we are up for this challenge. And so that this bill, a fitting first step to try to turn the criminal justice system in Connecticut around, where I believe the vast majority of individuals are committed to doing the very best that they can. And so as I indicated earlier, thank you, Governor Rell. Thank you, Senator McKinney, Senator Caligieri, my colleagues, Senator Fasano, Senator McDonald, Senator Williams, to everyone who put their heart and soul in trying to make the very best legislation possible for this afternoon. I do believe later on there will be an amendment placed upon our desk, and look forward to debating that also. But with that caveat, I would say at this time that I find the vast majority in this bill to commend, and I would urge my colleagues to support the underlying bill. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kissel. We remark